Hi and good evening. I'm very, very glad to be here. And before I start this talk, I would like to give a trigger warning for it. This talk is going to include mention of harassment, abuse, rape and death. And if you feel uncomfortable at any point during this talk, you're of course absolutely free to leave. So my name is Lena Reinhard. I'm an engineering manager at the moment. And I am here to talk to you about debugging the tech industry. Why are you here? Why am I here? Well, that one's a bit easier to answer for me. I'm here because I got here to Melbourne for the very first time just about 7 months ago. And this was the view from my plane seat at the time, right shortly before we were landing. I was on this plane because I had submitted a talk to a conference named JSConf Australia, and the organizers had invited me to come. And I'd submitted this talk because I deeply care about the state of the tech industry. And the reasons for that, I'm going to talk about a bit more later. To make that short, I'm here because on the 1st of August in 2016, at about 11 a.m. Central European summertime, I submitted a talk proposal to JSConf. And that's the first reason why I'm here today. Many times when I get into the middle of something, when my mind starts just feeling hazy and blurry, I like to pause for a moment, center myself and ask myself, why am I here? Especially when things are getting intense, when I'm stressed out and have a million things to do. Why am I here? I found this question incredibly useful. It helps me center myself again. It helps me remember what I set out to do and remember where I came from. It helps me see clearly again and focus on what really matters. And it helps me act accordingly. Many times where we are right now is the result of decisions we made many, many years ago. But we change, our needs change, our perspectives change, and our lives change. And other times, we just plainly forget what we set out to do. Thinking back to where we started can help us find our way out of being lost in detail. It can help us see the big picture again, and it can help us understand what really matters. This is a talk about the tech industry. And tonight, I want to ask us as an industry this very same question. Why are we here? This is why we're here. Sort of. This is an abacus calculating tool that first appeared about 4,300 to 4,700 years ago. Abaci are also called counting frames, and similar tools were used to do calculations, like addition, multiplication, but even more complex ones, like getting square roots. And there are many different versions of abaci, including one Mesopotamian version, an Egyptian version, a Persian version, a Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Native American version, and many, many more. They all look a bit different, but the principles are often the same. Even though thousands of years old, they're still used today. And they're also used for teaching kids arithmetics. We're also here because of this. This is the Antikythera mechanism. It was recovered over 116 years ago from a shipwreck off the Greek coast. It was used to predict astronomical positions and eclipses of heavenly bodies for calendrical and astrological purposes. This thing is a complex clockwork mechanism composed of at least 30 bronze gears. And it could also track the 4-year cycle of the athletic games, which was pretty similar, but not entirely the same as the Olympic Games. And this thing is an analog computer. Why is any of this relevant? Why look at what now are, well, yeah, pretty rusty and old devices? In the rush, in the haze of our daily work, we easily forget about this. But this is where we came from. Our information technology has its origins thousands of years ago. Ever since, though, things have changed a little bit. The information technology industry has become one of the most important and powerful industries in the world. And this is why, over the next hour, we'll talk about some things that are applicable to software specifically, and other things that are applicable to technology in a broader sense. Worldwide revenues for information technology, or IT, products and services are forecast to reach between 2 and 3.5 trillion US dollars in 2017. About 2 billion personal computers are used worldwide. About 2.3 billion people use smartphones. Around 3.6 billion people, or 40% of the world population, have access to the internet now. And humans globally spend on average about 2 hours a day on social networks. Software is also running on everything from smartphones to computers, washing machines, TVs, coffee makers, juicers, alarm clocks, thermostats, and smoke detectors. The reasoning behind that is a separate talk by itself, I guess. About 20 billion devices are now part of the so-called Internet of Things. And their number is supposed to double within the next 5 years. And software systems even lie at the heart of modern decision-making. Algorithms can decide whether we get credit, how much we're going to pay for our insurance, whether we get a phone contract, and can even decide whether we're potential criminals or not. Technology has become an important part of our lives, even if we're unaware of it, or even if we don't want it. And here's the very answer to the question why we are here. Even though our devices today are much shinier than this rusty device that I showed you earlier, and even though there will be even shinier and faster devices tomorrow, information technology has always been about information. Storing, retrieving, manipulating, communicating, and using it. Using it to make decisions and solve problems. But at its very core, information technology has always been about people. About helping people, supporting people, enabling and empowering them. Ultimately, people are the reason why we're here today. Our technology today can have positive impact on people and their lives. It can be a great tool for us to understand and satisfy our very basic human needs. And there are many people doing great things with technology. And there are some things about it that are just outright amazing. I just had to put this in there because it's just about a week old. So the Portland guinea pig rescue usually takes large numbers of guinea pigs in. And so they need to generate a lot of names for these guinea pigs at once. This is why this rescue center asked research scientist Janet Shane to build a neural network to help with naming these guinea pigs. Shane gave the neural network a list of about 600 guinea pig names to train itself, and then gave it some tweaks along the way. The neural network created a few names that were probably not really appropriate, like Mooney Hen, Me, I think Me is also a great name, Fleshy, or Boy, and Boy was spelled with 3 O's. But ultimately, the thing delivered. Some really guinea pig-like names like the ones you see here, including also Pop Chop, Pugger P, Sniffkit, Hanger Dan, or one of my favorites, Princess Pow. Yeah, I love this. So in the end, even if it's more than naming guinea pigs, technology can do great things. It can make great things possible, and it can really help people. But that's also why we need to be careful. Hypes easily distract us from what's really important. Hypes can also distract us from issues. Lack of critical distance can make it harder to see problematic aspects. And the ubiquity of technology increases its impact. And that's why, in the end, we need to critically examine technology. We're often hesitant to do this because, well, it's not that much fun necessarily, and we're pretty good at celebrating the positive sides that technology has. But this negative side of technology is one we rarely think about. So over the next minutes, I'll show you some examples for the negative impact of technology and the things that technology has done to people. When Apple first introduced its HealthKit app a couple years ago, you could track everything there. Your body measurements, fitness, nutrition, sleep, other vitals, but not your period. It took Apple 1 year to introduce period tracking to HealthKit. As a study from last year showed, virtual assistants like Microsoft Cortana, Apple's Siri, and Google Now redirected users to help when they said they had a heart attack. But at this point, none of these virtual assistants redirected a user to help when they said that they were being abused. Abuse disproportionately affects women. 1 in 3 women worldwide is affected by abuse at some point in her life. Over the past years, social networks have been reinforcing so-called real name policies, and real name usually meaning legal names. Originally, these policies were introduced to help tackle online harassment and stalking, but they didn't achieve that, rather to the contrary. These policies actively harmed marginalized and endangered groups that rely most heavily on pseudonyms, like activists, whistleblowers, LGBTQ people, Native Americans, non-binary people, women, and many, many more. These policies have even exposed domestic violence survivors to their abuses again. You may have heard of Pokemon Go, this wildly popular game last year. Pokemon Go is an augmented reality game, which basically uses phone cameras and GPS to show Pokemon in real-world environments. And the point of the game is that you walk around with your smartphone to catch these Pokemon. The original locations for these Pokemon were crowdsourced. Pokemon could initially be found in areas where walking around to catch Pokemon is not necessarily appropriate, like cemeteries, graveyards, the 9/11 Memorial, the Holocaust Memorial Museum, or the Auschwitz Memorial. For many people, the game was also pretty pointless to begin with. In some areas where most residents are minorities, in rural areas, as well as in low-income areas, Pokemon could hardly be found. Even worse though, we live in times of police brutality and racial profiling. Multiple black players were really worried that walking around playing this game will make them face racial profiling and expose them to dangers to their lives. Most apps and web technologies nowadays have built-in features for human interactions. For social networks like Twitter and Facebook, that's basically even the core of what they're doing. Most apps with such built-in features for human interactions have become greenhouses for harassment. 40% of adults on the internet have experienced online harassment. And this widespread harassment have made many, many technologies like these even unusable for many groups of people, like people of color, queer people, but also activists and many, many more had to leave these platforms because the harassment there literally made them sick. Technology can also be a contributing factor for social change. Businesses like Airbnb are contributing to growing housing crises in cities like San Francisco, New York, London, and Berlin by removing rental stock from the already tight housing markets, and in this way contributing to societal issues. End of last year, around 6,000 people from about 100 countries submitted photos of themselves for an international beauty contest, a contest that was judged by an AI. Artificial intelligence, sorry. The submissions were pretty diverse, but out of the 44 winners of this beauty contest, and this is only an excerpt, almost all were white, a handful were Asian, and only one person had dark skin. Face detection software and cameras and webcams can warn people when they're blinking. But it also asked Asian people if they were blinking when they were actually just had their eyes open. Other camera face recognition software just failed to even recognize people of color. It just said it wasn't detecting any face. And Flickr's photo auto-tagging algorithm auto-tagged a photo of a black man with the words ape and gorilla. Sorry, it was animal and ape. And Google's photo app classified images of black people as gorillas. When Microsoft launched its artificial intelligence chatbot Tay last year, the bot was supposed to learn human speech patterns. Within only a few hours, the bot started posting racist, sexist, homophobic, fascist tweets and started harassing other Twitter users. It was shut down less than 24 hours after its launch. Software is also used to assess the risk of recidivism in criminals. A recent investigation found that one of these tools was twice as likely to mistakenly flag black defendants as being at a higher risk for committing future crimes. The same software was also twice as likely to incorrectly flag white criminals, or white defendants, as low risk. Other software is used to assess whether people who are in jail can get parole or not. The source code for many of these tools is closed source, which means that defendants and their attorneys have no chance to understand why decisions are made and no chance to challenge the results. All of these are the examples I showed you over the last minutes. They're examples of software that enables harassment or perpetuates societal issues, as well as software that's insufficient or even racist, sexist, or dangerous. All these examples are about very different use cases and about very different applications. They have to do with different aspects of technology and software in a broader sense. Some are related to artificial intelligence, others to security, others to policy aspects, and others are more about game design and the effects of crowdsourcing. But all of these examples are just a few of many, many more. These examples aren't isolated incidents. They point to bigger problems. And they have one thing in common. While intended to be great tools for many, many people, they ended up only serving some people. Like the HealthKit app that tracks any vitals, but not periods. Or the social networks that enable people to stay connected to friends and family, as long as they're willing to provide their legal name and as long as they're willing to put up with harassment. And all of these are only very few examples for what our software does to people. Yes, there is software that does great things, that empowers and enables humans. But there are far too many and far too severe examples for what we as an industry do to people. And that's why these harmful examples are only a symptom. They are symptoms of the status of the tech industry. This tech industry is a system producing broken output. It's a system that's failing people instead of serving them. That's why we urgently need to do better than this. We urgently need to do right by people. In order to understand how we can do this, I would like to dissect with you over the next minutes where the systems failure of the tech industry is actually coming from. The tech industry as a system doesn't exist in isolation. We live in patriarchy, a social construct that enforces gender roles and is oppressive on humans. Our societies are also capitalist systems that have led to wealth and income inequalities. And we live in racist societies that center upon the false belief that white people are superior to people of other racial backgrounds. Together, patriarchy, capitalism, racism, as well as sexism, ableism, classism, transphobia, homophobia, and many, many more, and their intersections, all of these make our societies oppressive systems. And these oppressive systems influence each of us. They influence our beliefs, our view of the world, and they influence this industry and our work in it as well. Software development is an act of representation. And another reason why we as an industry are failing people has to do with this representation and the makeup of our industry. And there's a great example from the automotive industry to illustrate that point. Historically, automotive product design was largely defined by men. In the 1960s, dummies for car crash tests were modeled after the average man. Not for women, even less for pregnant women. As a study from 2011 found, women drivers are 47% more likely to be seriously injured in a car crash. How does that translate to the tech industry? Around 80% of engineering staff at major tech firms like Twitter, Google, and Facebook are men. And around between 60 and 95% of their staff are white. In Europe and Australia, about 70% of people working in tech are men. the numbers of people of color, LGBTQ people, or non-binary people are incredibly low. And it's even worse in our communities. 90 to 96% of open source contributors are men. The numbers of women of color, Black women, LGBTQ people, non-binary folks, and other groups are incredibly low. The latest open source software that GitHub published a couple of weeks ago speaks of 1% non-binary people and 3% women in open source software. The diversity in our societies is not reflected in this industry. The tech industry is a homogeneous system, and this misrepresentation is one of our most fundamental problems as an industry. It means that we're good at building solutions, as long as these solutions are for people who are very much like us. And it also means the more diverse our user base gets, the more detached we become from them, and the worse the effects of this misrepresentation get. The representation gap is also showing in our work, and the problems it causes are becoming more and more severe. Our algorithms learn by being fed data, often chosen by engineers, and our systems build a model of the world based on this data. This has strong defects. If a system is trained on photos of people who are overwhelmingly white, it will have a harder time recognizing the faces of Black people. But at the same time, we still believe that our algorithms are unbiased machines. And as long as we hold on to this belief, we risk reinforcing the status quo. As Lee Alexander described this effect, when bias appears in data, it seems to suggest that historically disadvantaged groups deserve the less favorable treatment they receive. Unless the data itself can be truly said to be fair, an algorithm can't do much more than perpetuate an illusion of fairness in a world that still scores some people higher than others, no matter how unbiased we believe a machine to be. This way, sexism, racism, and other forms of discrimination are being built into these worlds we create, worlds which then shape how humans are categorized and advertised to. This way, through our software, histories of discrimination can live on in our digital platforms. And right now, many threat scenarios around technology that are discussed by our industry heroes and by media focus on topics like the future of artificial intelligence and machines becoming smarter than humans. And all these scenarios are worth discussing, but for many people, software is already discriminating and threatening them. For many people, threats through technology are not some distant future scenario. They're already impacting their lives, and they already have very, very real and very severe consequences for them. Not only have we built software that systematically ignores people and their needs, we have built software that actively endangers marginalized persons. We have normalized racism, sexism, homophobia, harassment, and many, many more issues. We have created realities in which all of these things are the new status quo. And that's a serious problem. As the relatively young industry that we are, we have accumulated a huge amount of impact within a very short time. Our work has global impact, while at the same time, we lack answers for fundamental questions about the implications of our work. We have become too powerful and influential, and we need to start living up to the responsibilities that come with this power. And we have to start doing right by people. This takes me to another big reason for why this industry is broken. Whenever we hear stories, not only the language processing parts in our brain get activated, stories also lead to activation of any other area in our brain that we would usually use to actually experience the events of the story ourselves. Stories can plant ideas, thoughts, and emotions into our brains. For thousands of years, telling story has been one of the most fundamental communication methods that humans have been using. And here is my story. It's the story of why I'm here today. I got into the tech industry rather coincidentally. After working in finance and while starting to work out as a writer, I got my first writing job in a tech company, and it soon turned into a marketing and account management role. Later, I started contributing to open source projects. Then I founded my first tech company and became a CEO. And this is how I got into the engineering management role that I have today. This is one version of my time in the tech industry so far. It's the version that would fit well into a resume. But there's another side to that story. This other side began when I started meeting other women in tech. We started talking, and at some point they started telling me their stories. These were stories of having lots of fun exploring technology, stories of building super cool things, stories of awesome side projects, story of learning, stories of growing, and stories of finding community. But each of these women I talked to also had other stories. The kind of stories that often only came up a couple hours into a conversation. These were the stories of horrible hiring processes and stories of not finding jobs. Stories of not being taken seriously by coworkers. Stories of less qualified men being promoted over them. They were stories of microaggressions at work, of sexism, and of harassment. Stories of constantly being asked to do unpaid diversity labor for the company on the side, and stories of being pushed to do emotional labor. There were stories of online harassment and of being driven out of open source communities. And many of them were also stories of doubt, of wondering whether it was their own fault that I just didn't succeed. When I started hearing these stories, I was just a little time into my first tech job. And I had no idea. I'm a white, able-bodied woman with what's socially considered acceptable weight and height, and I have a ton of privilege. And as privilege does, my privilege had shielded me from such experiences thus far. And my privilege had also allowed me not to care about the experiences of other women or other people in this industry. Fast forward 7 years. Now I too have such stories. Stories like these women I met back then. Some of my stories are very small, others are a bit bigger, and all of these stories still speak of my privilege, which shields me from many issues in this industry. In the end, together, all of them make for a collection of stories. Almost every member of an underrepresented group in tech has such stories. Every woman of color, every non-binary person, every black woman, every queer person, everyone else who's not like the majority of people in this industry. All these stories are stories of having to prove yourself over and over and over again. Prove your worth, prove your abilities. They're stories of being in an industry that keeps on telling people like us that we don't belong here. Many people have risked their careers to tell their stories, because they wanted to make things better for other folks in this industry, and because they wanted to make this industry better. And for every story that's out there, there are 100 stories that aren't told, because people can't afford to risk their careers for telling their stories, or because telling their stories could make things even worse for them. Or because the people who were involved were too powerful, were industry heroes, and could harm them. Right now, people in tech have to carefully weigh the risks and ramifications of speaking up. And then, for every story that's out there, and for every story that isn't told, there are another 100 stories that we'll just never hear, because the people who could tell them have already left the industry. The quit rate of women in tech is 41%. That's more than twice the number of men. And for many members of underrepresented groups, the question, so what will you do after tech, has become a sort of running joke. We laugh about it because it's funny, but also not because it's true. And it's a thing, one of the things you talk about when you're a couple hours into a conversation. In spring 2015, Table Flip Club was released, and the manifesto is still online under tableflip.club. It gave words to what many women and members of underrepresented groups in the industry have experienced for decades. And I'd like to quote a few excerpts from it. For years, we thought it was us, that we were failures. We thought that if we just did twice as well as the pasty hoodie wearers around us, we'd move up through the ranks too. Instead, you got twice as much work out of us than you did out of our male peers, and tossed us a few scraps of women's networks and lean-in circles instead of promotions and raises. We've watched mediocre men whiz by us on a glass escalator, including in the part of tech companies which include a disproportionate number of women. Roles that get dismissed as pink collar, such as marketing, HR, and QA. We've had our work toned down in code reviews and performance reviews, while our male peers backpat each other's bad work onwards to the next production incident. We are following in the footsteps of brave women who flipped tables out of our way, clearing the path we're now walking down. 2015 is the year of the table flip. And this takes me to the third part of this story, which has become my story. The story of how I became a feminist. I wasn't born as a tiny baby feminist who then turned into a full-grown feminist one day. There was a point in my life when I decided that I wanted to become a feminist. And there was another point in my life when I decided that I wanted to work on being an ally to other people who face more and more difficult oppression than I am. I made life experiences, I heard stories, and I learned. I learned from the women, the black women, the women of color, the queer folks. I learned from all of those who are still here today, and from those who were here long ago, way long before me, and who made things easier for us who are here now. I learned from many people in this industry who have been fighting in here for 20, 30 years already. And I will always keep on learning from them. And all of this is my story. This is my story of my time in the tech industry. And this story is the reason why I'm here today. Underrepresented people in tech have been telling their stories for decades. And all these stories are incredibly important, and they're powerful, and we should be grateful for them. And here's the thing. Each of these stories by itself is one piece. But the difficulties each of us face aren't just the problems of one individual, of one company, or one community. These problems are systemic. We get punished by this system. And the sum of our stories makes for a picture of the tech industry that is much less pretty than our shiny, polished hardware and our beautiful interfaces. It's a picture of the tech industry that shows its systemic issues. It's the picture of an industry that tells us to lean in if we want to succeed and pushes back if we even try. And it's an industry that desperately wants to get more of us into its pipeline, a pipeline that just ends in a toxic environment. What's even worse, for a long, long time, we've not only had the stories, we've also had the data. We have had all the numbers of showing us the low and in some countries even declining numbers of women graduating computer science. We've had the low numbers of women working in tech companies. We've had the numbers from open source projects telling us that barely no one except men is contributing to them. But things have only gotten worse over time. And right now, all these stories are not more than, well, stories for the majority of people in the tech industry. Right now, underrepresented people in tech are still underrepresented. Right now, white, cis, able-bodied men still have a near monopoly on the power and money that keep this industry up and running. I've given talks like this one about the state of the tech industry for a couple of years now. After every one of these talks, some people would approach me, and I got to have really great conversations with many people over this time. But there were also other reactions, particularly two standing out. The first one, I don't think what you're saying is true. I just don't think things are like this. The second one, I've been in the tech industry for 3, 5, 10 years, and I've never seen anything like this. Thing is, I understand such reactions. First of all, because I can empathize with them. For many of the people who approached me with such reactions, it was just the first time that they heard of these issues. Many of them were just genuinely surprised. And I understand their reactions because, honestly, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I might even have reacted in a similar way. Thing is, almost everyone who was so surprised about the state of the tech industry was a cis white man. Many of us members of this industry have huge privilege. This privilege shields us, and this privilege will mean that there will always be experiences that we will just never make on our own. And this privilege also means we have the luxury not to listen and the luxury not to care about experiences that people make who are different from us. No matter if these people are in the tech industry and members of our communities, or if these people are users of our technology. With our privilege, we are living examples of the classic, but it works on my machine, or it works in my life. Our privilege allows us to just never hear about, let alone experience, the bad side and the harmful impact of the tech industry. Do you remember the examples from earlier? The examples for the harm that this industry does to its users? All these examples disproportionately affect groups that are also underrepresented in the tech industry. The majority of people in tech are not affected by the majority of problems within this industry. And the majority of people in tech are not affected by the majority of problems that this industry is causing for our users. And we don't know because we don't have to know, because we don't experience these issues ourselves, and we never may. So we don't care because we don't have to care. From its beginnings, information technology has always been there to help people, serve people, support people. Now, I would like for us as an industry to make this the core of our work again. I would like for us to center our work on people, because in the end, people matter more than anything else. We need to care about people to do right by them. And I want for us as an industry to care. And I want for us as an industry to change. For this change to happen, every one of us needs to choose to care. Because every one of us has impact on our companies, communities, and overall on this industry. No matter who you are in tech or what you're working on at the moment, you can make this happen. And so I want to ask you to help debug this broken industry. And this is why this talk, as well as debugging the tech industry, is about you and me. Debugging this industry comes down to you and me. And debugging this industry is about people like you, like me, and about people that are different from you and me. So how do we change this industry? And how do we make people the center of our work again? Two main things we need to do. We need to change this industry and its inner works, and the way we treat people in tech. And we need to change the way we treat our users. These two can't be separated. We can only build meaningful technology if we care about the inner works of this industry and about the users of our technology. And there are many things that we can do to make people the center of our work. Any meaningful change starts with understanding ourselves. This is why we need to understand our position in the world. We need to examine ourselves and our privileges. We need to understand what it is that we don't know and that we don't see. We need to stop assuming that everyone has what we have and that everyone can go through life relatively carefree like many of us can. The default person in the world is not a cis-white, heterosexual, able-bodied man in his 20s who received education in his life and doesn't have financial worries or mental health issues, and who doesn't have to be concerned with his safety online. This is not a person whose identity and existence have never questioned. This is not the default. The default is not a person who's never been attacked for who they are or who they want to be with. But we still build much of our software as if that were the case. But our privilege is not only about identity. It's not only about our realities and life experiences. It's also about access. Not everyone has the money, the electricity, high-speed internet access, the expensive devices, the same education, knowledge of technology and how to use it, and so many more things that many of us are just used to. We need to understand that what's safe and easy for many of us is very likely neither safe nor easy for other people. This is also why we need to work on understanding others better. And the best way we can do that is by learning and practicing to shut up and listen. We need to listen to members of underrepresented groups in tech. And listening means that we need to actively search for voices of those that we didn't hear before. And it's our responsibility to educate ourselves on topics that have shaped our past and that will shape our present and future. Topics that will also influence the future of technology, like social justice, inequality, and systemic oppression. Educating ourselves is our responsibility. We must never ask members of underrepresented groups to educate us. And we need to end the homogeneity of this industry and work on becoming more diverse. The main idea of diversity work is to give access to resources, power, and representations to groups that didn't have them before. Diversity efforts are efforts to correct systemic inequality. This is why diversity is a political issue. But our diversity work needs to be intersectional. It needs to be aware that different people face different layers of oppression and forms of oppression and discrimination at more than one level, and that these levels are intertwined and accumulate each other. Our diversity must mean we include a broad range of people, like women of color, non-binary people, Black women, lesbian, bisexual, and gay people, older people, trans people, disabled people, people with physical or mental illnesses, people who have to do care work, and many, many more. This is the diversity that we urgently need. But, as mentioned earlier, this industry's culture right now is still toxic, particularly for members of underrepresented groups like the aforementioned. This is why, in order to change this industry in meaningful and long-lasting ways, we need to fix our systemic issues. And we need to work hard on making our organizations, communities, and companies more inclusive. Inclusion is a topic that's very near and dear to me. There are many, many more things to be said about inclusion than I can say in the remaining couple minutes that I have today. So I want to give you just a few pointers that you can start with in your company or community. First of all, like with any other of these topics, educate yourself and give others chances to educate themselves, like through trainings or workshops. Have open and ongoing conversations about how biases, privilege, power dynamics, and more play into your work. Be ready to dedicate yourself to this work. Inclusion can't be half-baked. Critically examine your company makeup, your company culture, and your processes. Ask yourself and the people you work with, are we as a company or community diverse? And in which aspects do we need to improve? Whose perspectives are we missing out on? How can we make sure we provide people with equal opportunities? And which of our actions are actively harmful for underrepresented people in tech? Do thorough self-examinations like these on a regular basis. give also up on the idea of meritocracy. Meritocracy, the idea that people could be judged by their merit only, it's a lie. Don't buy into it. Establish a code of conduct that's enforceable. Take reports of misbehavior seriously. And be prepared to actually enforce your code of conduct. Understand microaggressions and how they play out in the work environment that you have in your company or community, and take reports of microaggressions seriously. Formalize, formalize, formalize. Formalize your processes, the way you work, your documentation, your guidelines for interactions and language, and much more. Formalize. You should also make sure that inclusion is not only done by the diversity and inclusion department or by your human resources team. Inclusion needs to be everyone's work. Everyone needs to contribute to it. And keep doing all of that. Donate your time, knowledge, money, technical skills to organizations that work on making the tech industry a better place. And yeah, once you got to this point in the list, restart. Inclusion is a multifaceted topic, and these 12 points I mentioned earlier are not more than a few pointers. Inclusion is never done, and it's never ready. People change, our lives change, our realities change, and as communities and companies, we need to adapt to that. Inclusion is work, and it's very, very important work. Inclusion is what makes all the difference. It will help us make this industry a better place in the long term. And it will help us make it a better place for the people in this industry, as well as for the people that use our technology. But we need to start changing the way we treat our users right now. Our users are not single data points or test scenarios. They're humans, and as such, they're carrying their past, present, their entire life experiences in when they're using what we built. And we do just the same. The environments we create in our software will affect the way our users feel and will affect our interactions we have with them. So we need to view our users' interactions with our software as a complete personal experience. This is why empathy is our responsibility. And it's a skill that we need to practice every day. Empathy helps us feel and understand the emotions, circumstances, and thoughts and needs of the humans around us and our interactions with them. Learning empathy and practicing it in our daily work will fundamentally change our interactions with our users, as well as with other people in this industry. We also need to build consent in our technology. Consent is an active process of willingly and freely choosing an activity consented to. It requires that the person giving consent is informed, so they can make meaningful choices. We need to enable our users to enthusiastically consent. This means we need to stop with the pre-checked boxes that trick users into subscribing to our newsletters. We need to stop the deceptive linking practices. And we need to stop the software rollouts that partly let users opt out again of new features. We also need to stop making it difficult for people to protect their privacy and their personal information. And it means we need to stop disregarding privacy concerns in general. And we basically need to stop with any other way we currently use to trick our users. Consent is an equality issue. We need to emphasize consent in what we build, and we need to build tools which enable our users to enforce their own granular boundaries. And we need to make ethics part of our approach to our work. Ethics are moral principles that govern our actions. Considering ethical aspects in our work means looking past and thinking past current trends and anticipating every future utilization of our work. Ethics in practice are a very complex topic, and that makes it even harder for us to make room for it in our daily work. But as a starting point, I would like to ask a bunch of questions over the next minutes. I don't have answers to these questions, but I want to encourage you to think about them and would like to encourage you to talk about them with your colleagues and to find answers to them together with the people you work with. Who's part of our companies and communities? Are people who are different from me part of it? If not, why is that? Is the organization I work for inclusive? Is it inclusive for people who are not like me? Does this organization have ethical guidelines for how it works and who it works with? Do we move fast and break things? Is moving fast and breaking things wise when it could mean that we're exposing users to data breaches and security issues or bugs? Do we anticipate and prevent misuse of the tools we build? How could our tools be used to annoy, spam, harass, or hurt someone or put them in danger? Can users easily block others who are threatening, abusing, or spamming them? Is it easy to opt out of features we release? Does our software actually do what it claims? Or do we trick users into doing things that they wouldn't want if they were aware of them? What do we hide in the terms and conditions for our software? And which information do we display to users in our interfaces? Is that information actually factually true? And do we present users only with what they want to see? How do we decide whether a bug is serious enough to be fixed? Do we fix bugs of high-paying customers first? Or do we treat them all equally? Is our software accessible? If not, why is that? And who do we exclude by not making it accessible? What do we allow users to see in an offline state? And how much data do our apps consume? What does that mean for who can actually financially afford to use our software? Do we only collect user data that we really need? What could people with bad intentions do with the data we have stored? Could it be used to track or profile people? When we say we delete data, do we actually destroy it? Are our log files adequately protected? Who can access them? And what can happen to our users when someone obtains the data that we store about them? What if this is an entity that is able to connect these data points with other data points that they've obtained? Which risk are we exposing people to? And do we consider that the paradigms around the software that we build and the data we store can shift anytime? In many countries across the globe, fascism has been on the rise for quite some time again. Knowing that, what will we do? And what do we do when we are asked to hand user data to authorities, including governments? Regulations that are in place to protect people from unreasonable demands can shift anytime. And it's a safe bet to say that they will. So how much data do we store? And what will we do if we receive demands to hand it over? All of these are important questions, and they're only starting points to spark conversation. So I want to encourage you to ask them. Ask yourself, ask your coworkers, and think through the way that what your work does to people. And think through what risks you may be exposing people to. Working on software in the year 2017 is more than making some designs or typing code into an editor. We are enablers. We are enablers for empowerment of people, and we're enablers for harassment and abuse. We are not neutral. Our code is not neutral. Our technology is not neutral. Our work touches on the fundamentals of people's identities and their lives. Our work is highly political. Each of us, with every button we design, with every line of code, with every word, with every action, each of us takes a stand. This is a talk about the tech industry. But most importantly, this is a talk about people like you and me, and a talk about people who are very different from us. This is why I want to encourage you to challenge and change the way that you approach your work. I want to encourage you to critically examine this industry and your position in it. And this is why I want to encourage you to be someone who cares. Care about your actions and your impact. Care about people, because people matter above all else. Care about people who are like you and about people who are different from you. Care about the people inside and people outside of this industry. Because in the end, people are the reason why we're here. In an essay about the impact of activism and resistance, Rebecca Solnit wrote the following about hope. Optimism assumes that all will go well, without our effort. Pessimism assumes it's all irredeemable. Both let us stay at home and do nothing. Hope, for me, has meant a sense that the future is unpredictable and that we don't actually know what will happen, but know we may be able to write it ourselves. Hope is a belief that what we do might matter, an understanding that the future is not yet written. It's informed, astute open-mindedness about what can happen and what role we may play in it. Earlier in this talk, I spoke about the stories that many of us have collected from our time in this industry. If you are such a person with a story, I wish you specifically that you can have this kind of hope. This hope that knows we may be able to write ourselves what will happen, and this hope for change. And I want to encourage all of you to work on making this change happen together with us. And whenever you go back to your work, maybe tomorrow, next week, or next month, I want to encourage you to keep asking yourself, why am I here? Thank you for having me, and good night.